I'm a firm believer, like you said, that we are not here to do life alone. And I really believe that God sends certain people in our life for a reason. And it is up to us to utilize those people and lean on them and go to them for counsel and receive their support. Whenever I first started really unpacking everything that I had gone through with my experience of struggling in silence for many years, the experience of having the attempt itself, surviving the attempt and feeling so grateful, so redeemed, but at the same time, feeling like a perpetrator, feeling guilty, feeling shameful, feeling embarrassed because I did that, and having to grapple with that. I felt so much freedom whenever I leaned on people, whenever I relied on people. And so I always tell people all the time, if you're not speaking it out or writing it down and you're storing it, it becomes really heavy. And I always encourage people, if you're dealing with anything, whether it's a small issue, feeling, or circumstance, or it's a really big one, and it's been weighing on you for days, seek help, seek support, reach out to people that you know and you trust.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Built Different podcast. My name is Zach Clinton. I'll be your host, and as we continue to grow, I'll have friends joining me each week to interview some of the leading experts in the fields of motivational speaking, mental health, ministry, and even sports. Our goal is to instill hope, encouragement, and motivation in and through your life today. And our prayer is that after each episode, you'd be more equipped and encouraged to look, love, and live more like Christ from the inside out. That's our definition of what it means to be built different. So I hope you're ready. You better buckle up. Let's roll. Miss Emma, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Zach. Thank you so much for having me.
Always a blessing to have the opportunity to interview you, to spend some time just talking about something both of us are incredibly passionate about. You're an advocate in this mental health space, especially around the topic of suicide prevention. We know that suicide can be a very sensitive topic for some of our listeners and viewers today, but it's something that is imperative that we need to discuss. We're coming out of Mental Health Awareness Month, the month of May. We're now entering into June, but you and I both know in this mental health space that these conversations and discussions need to happen far more than a 30-day window. So for you, speak to the importance of not only mental health awareness in the month that we just came out of in May, but also why it needs to be an ongoing conversation far greater than just that 30-day window.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that every day we should be talking about and prioritizing our mental and emotional well-being, our mental health. I think, and I tell people all the time in the work that I get to do with advocacy and spreading my testimony, I tell people all the time, mental health is not a destination. It is an ongoing, everlasting journey that we as human beings will have to face. And so it's so important that we learn how to have these conversations. We identify those people who we feel safe around, those trusted people in our sphere that we can go to, and we just start the dialogue. We just learn, hey, how do I unpack this thing that I'm dealing with, whether it's a circumstance or an emotion or a mental battle that they're dealing with? How do I unpack it in a healthy way and express it and learn to work through it and cope with it? So I am always open and up for having conversations about feelings and mental health. I know that a lot of people don't really like to get sensitive and prefer not to get too in the weeds with their feelings, but I think it's so necessary. And for me, it's been so healing. So I think the more we talk about mental health, the better we're going to be.
Absolutely. And I think these conversations are so important because, like you said, some people may have been hurt by relationships, so it's a natural tendency to pull away, to put up those barriers or those walls where they don't want to get vulnerable, they don't want to get sensitive, they don't want to expose some of their feelings. But the truth is that there's only healing in what we're able to reveal. And so we need to be able to have these conversations and to be able to ask for help. Emma, as you mentioned, no one is a stranger to pain, adversity, challenge in this life. You are no stranger to it yourself. You have a very unique testimony that I know you now go around the world sharing, not just in high schools to the next generation, but to people of all different kinds. And I just would ask of you, if it's okay with you, I'd love for you just to share a little bit about your testimony and what God has really pulled you up out of.
Yeah, absolutely. So my testimony really begins with my little life growing up in Louisiana. I am a Southern girl at heart, and I was born and raised in a really great home. I come from two very loving parents and a middle class family. And on the outside, ideally my life looked perfect. It was
Mm,
picture perfect. It was kind of the essence of what every girl growing up in middle class America aspires to be. Popular, cheerleader, had all of the friends and
mm,
everything, on the outside, the exterior was pretty perfect. It looked beautiful. And there were aspects of it that were beautiful and amazing. And there was a lot of joyous moments in my life growing up. But there was also an element to my story and my
mm,
testimony that wasn't so evident to the people in
mm,
my life. There was an aspect of my experience as a kid growing up in that environment, in those settings, where I never really felt good enough. I never really felt seen, worthy, valued, validated. And I was dealing with that all along while living this picture perfect esque life. And I really struggled with that dichotomy. I struggled with living this great, blessed life, but at the same time, not always feeling happy, not always having the ability to feel grateful. And so I really struggled in elementary school, in middle school, in high school with dealing with the feelings and the emotions, the negative feelings and emotions, but never feeling like those feelings were right. So I never felt justified in those feelings. I always felt so much shame around any negative emotion, any negative feeling, any negative experience, even. I felt shame. I felt I shouldn't feel this way. Other people have it worse than me. I've got to suck it up. Look at my life. I have so many blessings. I've just got to pull my bootstraps up and keep going. Head down, keep going. Dust it off, pretend like, I'm fine. And that was kind of the way that I navigated. That was how I dealt with hardships. That's how I dealt with struggle. And that's how I dealt with hard things. I never opened up. I never reached out to those people that are in my life, in my support circle. I never really identified with those experiences of struggling with my mental health. And on top of that, growing up in the community that I did, no fault to anyone in the community, but mental health was not a topic of conversation. It was certainly not something that people were eager or willing to talk about. So I did feel a lot of the effects of the stigma that does surround mental and emotional pain and distress. And so the stigma in combination with me feeling like these feelings don't belong to me, I just struggled in a state of isolation. And there got to a point where when I was in high school and there were all the pressures of peers and fitting in and what this group is doing, what that group is doing, and, future plans and careers and colleges and all of the things, all of that stress on top of everything that I was dealing with and the way that I was dealing with it in a very unhealthy way just sort of culminated and made me feel hopeless. And so whenever I entered into the summer going into my senior year of high school, where all of those pressures really felt like they were about to boil over, um, I cracked and I acted on a really dark thought that had been popping up into my mind sporadically throughout the past couple of months, and I acted on the thought for the first time. And it was in June of 2017, so the summer before my senior year of high school. I was dealing with suicidal thoughts. I was having really dark thoughts, feeling hopeless, feeling feelings of despair, and just really depressed. I was in depression. And I acted on a very intense, intrusive thought, and I attempted to take my life on June 7th of 2017. And that was the day that forever changed everything for me.
I appreciate just the honesty and the vulnerability, right? And being able to share some of the struggles that you dealt with, some of the pressures that were pressing against you. I think that's the big word for our next gen, right? A lot of people don't really truly understand the unique pressures that this next generation is having to endure and go through, not just, athletically and academically, but also socially. You talk about comparison, and with technology, I mean, it's at a different level. And I believe that's really what is contributing to the influx we're seeing in mental health challenges amongst our next generation, such as anxiety, depression, addiction, eating disorders, suicide. All of these things are at levels that we've never seen before, and especially amongst our girls, Emma. CDC reported back in 2021, I believe it was, 57% of our girls, our daughters, our sisters, our friends are struggling with, persistently sad or depressive symptoms, with 30% of those girls seriously contemplating suicide, right? That's an issue. That's something that we should be talking about. We should be addressing. Why do you think there's still a stigma around mental health care with how high those statistics are?
I think about that often, and I consider different reasons and different factors as to why the stigma is still plaguing a lot of our communities and a lot of our groups. And one thing that always comes to mind whenever I think about why is there still such a large stigma, I think it has to do with people not wanting to acknowledge the uncomfortable truths that we need to acknowledge and unpack in order to actually make changes. And I think that the stigma kind of keeps us in this comfortable place. It kind of keeps us in this place of, that's not my story. That's not my life. No one in my life feels that way. That's not something that I will be affected by. It's almost like a lot of people think that they're somehow not susceptible to struggling, to suffering with mental and emotional pain. So I think that feeling that a lot of people are walking around with, carrying that feeling, which is really just fear. If we break it down, it's just fear. I think that is what is perpetuating a lot of this stigma. And then too, high schoolers and teenagers in general, they have pressures and what's cool and what's not cool. So I think there is a lot of the stigma being perpetuated within the school walls because everyone wants to be accepted. Everyone wants to be invited. Everyone wants to be seen as the cool kid. And having struggles with your mental health isn't necessarily seen as quote unquote cool. So I think those two reasons, in my opinion, are really big factors as to why so many young people are really dealing with the effects of the stigma, as opposed to, other groups and age groups, right? Yeah. You would understand, it makes sense that someone who has a job where they are in a position over people, or they're maybe in a corporate office and they have people that are under them that they are leading, that stigma can perpetuate in that way because, they don't want to be viewed as tainted or incapable of doing their job and things like that. But I think it's a little bit different when we think about our youth, for sure.
It absolutely is. And I think, too, it goes back to that idea. We've chatted about this. I've shared this with you, that I think for whatever reason, culture and society has made us believe that brokenness is equated to embarrassment or humiliation. And it's almost expected of us that we just need to, put on the bootstraps, buckle it up, and we need to get done and down in the itty-gritty type of thing, and we need to get this thing figured out. We have to go about it on our own. That's just the pressure that, for whatever reason, is placed on so many young people, or at least that's what they perceive is placed on them. When in reality, man, if you hear anything today, it's please ask for help. You don't have to suffer alone. You don't have to suffer in silence, as you would say. One thing I want to ask you, Emma, is being somebody that's experienced those things, myself included. I think of, my own journey, my own sports history of, suffering from performance anxiety and different things like that, to the point of throwing up before every game because I felt the pressure on me to perform. I didn't want to disappoint anybody, right? My coaches, my parents, my teammates, so on and so forth. And so that leads you down some difficult paths, reaching for anything to numb or anesthetize those pain, relief, so on and so forth. What do you think are some of the big contributing factors that are enhancing the pressure amongst today's generations?
Oh man, I think you touched on it a little bit earlier when you were talking about social media and the internet. I think from my perspective and from my experience, that was one of the larger factors that was contributing to this need for perfection, this need to never fail. Because when you are on the internet, on social media, and you're scrolling and you're just seeing people's highlights, their best moments, their happiest moments, when they feel they look their best, when they're accomplishing something, when they've done something that is noteworthy, they post about it. And so
Mm,
that's all you're really consuming, especially Gen Z, the youth of today. That is the generation that is on Instagram, on TikTok, on Snapchat, dealing with all of these other people's lives, having to consume all of that. It becomes really difficult to really put things into perspective. And so, from my experience, what I was dealing with was, because I was consuming so much of other people's lives,
yeah.
my perception of reality actually became distorted. I
Mm,
really started to think that there is something wrong with me, because
right.
why am I not achieving X, Y, and Z that so and so is? There must be I'm deficient somehow,
Mm,
because why am I not where they are? And so there is that elevated level of comparison
mhm.
when you're online, when you're on social media. And then I also think, going back to the campus, the school setting, again, everyone wants to feel like people value them. Everyone wants to feel seen. Everyone wants to feel validated. And
Mm,
so it's a chase for validation. If I can, be the athlete on the team who scored the most goals, or if I could be the cheerleader that's in the center of the routine, then I'm going to get the validation just from the views, just from the attention. And I
mm.
think it's a natural human thing. I mean, that is just natural within humanity. I mean, we all are guilty of it, wanting validation, but I think it's taken to a new level, at least now in modern society, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think, when we work with young people, especially amongst suicide and so on and so forth, and those topics and those related challenges, it's easy for us to look back and say, well, yeah, one reason why I think young people struggle with it the most is the impulsivity aspect of it, right? Not really thinking through exactly what that decision is going to do. But also, I believe you're touching on this right now. It's an identity crisis, I think, sometimes. We don't really know who we are. We just are trying to be someone that maybe we're not, or what we think is expected of us, who we think other people want us to be, comparing ourselves to other people, and we know comparison is the thief of joy. Speak to what you have learned in the midst of your journey, Emma, and how you try to infuse true identity into our next generation to remind them of who they are because of whose they are.
Oh man, this is one of the best things about getting the privilege to share my testimony, really, is speaking life into the next generation. And it's always so amazing to see like light bulbs go off in their brains whenever they
Yeah.
hear me say, your identity is not based on your abilities or your accolades or what you can and cannot do. It is solely based alone in whose you belong and
Mm,
whose you are. And I love sharing that with them because it's such a freeing thing. When I stepped into my true identity as a daughter of the King, as a daughter of Jesus Christ,
mm.
I never felt so free.
Yeah,
It almost felt like I didn't have to try anymore. I
that's right.
didn't have to pretend or put in this effort or keep up this persona of perfection, this image. I had a new image. I had a new name. I had a new
Mm,
face. I had a new aura about me. And I love sharing that with people because it's so true. We as humans living in the world can get so caught up in what the world says about us, about what
mm,
the world says we have to be, about what so and so says we need to be and do in order to be accepted, in order to be validated and valued. But I have never felt more value than whenever I stepped into my new identity as a daughter of Christ. And
mm.
getting to walk in that is so freeing. And so being able to do that for other people is a blessing. And I love sharing that. I also love to share that, with the parents of these youth, of these adolescents,
Yes.
that speaking life into your kid is so much more than telling them, I'm proud of you for scoring that goal. It really
Yes.
is speaking to their character, what God says about them, how they're unique, how they're
Mm,
compassionate, how they're courageous. These words, these, you know, um, affirmations, if you will, are
mm.
so healing and helpful for a youth, for a teenager. And I love doing that for people. So I speak that to them. I make sure that they know that their identity is not what they are or what the world says they are. but it's based in something much bigger, something that no one can take away from them. And so that's been honestly the biggest lesson that I've been able to learn and take away. I've also learned what you mentioned a minute ago, comparison. It's the thief of joy. I've never felt more stripped of my true joy than whenever I'm in a state of deep comparison. Comparing looks, comparing abilities, comparing XYZ. It really depletes you of your true joy. And I've learned that the replacement of that is gratitude.
That's
So
right.
anytime I'm feeling down and out or discouraged or maybe sad or falling into a state of depression, I always turn to gratitude. I always revert back to what has God given me in this moment that I can praise him and thank him for. And doing that, it's like you become new. It's really is such a shift in perspective, and getting to teach that coping skill to our youth is so powerful.
And I think it even, supersedes our youth here when we talk about suicide, because I do a lot of work with men in men's ministry. I walk alongside of a lot of men in their, let's just say, 50s, 60s, 70s. And a lot of those men, Emma, it's fascinating, actually struggle with suicide at rates that really mimic the youth in the next generation. Why? Because a lot of them are entering into retirement, and then in a sense they almost lack purpose because they forget their identity is not found in what they do but in who they are. And so what you're mentioning is, hey, you know what, at the end of the day, find out who you are because of whose you are. Know your true identity in Christ. A fun little exercise I really do with the next generation in counseling is I have them read through, if they're open to the idea of faith and they want to incorporate spirituality into the therapeutic process, I'll have them read Ephesians 1 and Ephesians 2 and pull out all of the different things that God says we are. So whether it be a child of God, whether it be redeemed, whether it be chosen, and have all of these different words that they can look back on and say, you know what, even in my darkest moments, I am all of these things because of Christ and because of what he has already done for me. Just a fun little activity that I love offering people because it reminds me of my worth and my value and my identity, and it reminds me that those things are detached from my performance. Something that your story really reminds me of, Emma, and your testimony is that just because somebody carries it well doesn't mean it's not heavy, as that old quote says, right? So many people, we can wear a mask or a facade, and we could put on a smile, and when we walk by somebody in the hallway and they say, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing good. And we just say a simple thing because, you know what, we don't want anybody to really know what's really going on underneath the surface. But what it reminds me of is the significance of people in our lives. We need other people. We weren't made to do this life alone. We were made for community and relationship. Speak to the importance of people fuel, especially to the person out there, Emma, today who maybe feels like they're suffering alone.
Oh man, that is such a good point. That was really a word right there, because that is one of the biggest things really that I can take away from my journey in healing and working through my mental and emotional pain and distress is leaning on the people. Freedom whenever I leaned on people, whenever I relied on people. And so I always tell people all the time, if you're not speaking it out or writing it down and you're storing it, it becomes really heavy. And I always encourage people, if you're dealing with anything, whether it's a small issue, feeling, or circumstance, or it's a really big one, and it's been weighing on you for days, seek help, seek support, reach out to people that you know and you trust. There is no shame, should be zero shame with leaning on people for support. I believe that that is how I have been able to recover so well. The people that were in my corner really uplifted me and encouraged me and spoke life over me and prayed for me. And that is why I'm able to share and use this, because I truly believe had I not leaned on those people and had those people not supported me in those ways, I would be a lot further behind on this journey than what I am. So I am a true advocate for counseling and therapy. I think we can all use a therapist. We all need some therapies from time to time.
That's right.
And it's nothing more. I always paint the picture, and use a little analogy. I don't think it's anything more than a gym membership for your brain. When you go to the gym and you start lifting weights, those weights don't become lighter, you just become stronger.
That's
And
right.
that's the same thing with therapy and counseling and relying on people to support you. Things don't become easier, you just become stronger and more equipped.
Come on, Emma. I'm a counselor who I would say I have several counselors. I'm not kidding you. I go to so many different people that I
Yep.
can be open to and vulnerable about because, like you said, we all need help, right? Nobody is a stranger to pain or adversity. And I'm not only talking about, I think a lot of people view counseling and mental health care as a reactive process. You're reacting to a negative situation that's happened in life, but also be proactive about your mental health and your well-being and your wellness, right? You can go talk to somebody even when things in the skies are clear because you're training for the trials that you're not yet in, right? Because it's the work that we do when the skies are clear that will prepare us for when the storms come rocking our ship. And so I would encourage anybody out there, be sure to continually seek help. And a fun activity, I remember a guy told me years ago, he would always say, Zach, wake up every day and ask who's on my board of directors, right? Who's on your committee? Who's on your inner circle? And if you don't have many names that come to mind, maybe it's time to work on investing in that board every single day. And so, as we talk about People Fuel, as we talk about counseling, I know there's probably a lot of parents out there listening. I know there might be some coaches or some mental health coaches that are out there listening, Emma. What are some things that we can begin doing to create atmospheres and environments of safety? I remember a previous interview, you talked a lot about modeling vulnerability, which I love that point. Expound upon that, but then just some other tidbits and strategies that we can begin applying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned I had spoke on really modeling and proving an example of vulnerability with your kids. That's so important. I feel like a lot of parents, out of a place of love, of course,
Yeah.
don't want to share when they had a bad day, don't want to share whenever they're going through something with their children because they don't want it to negatively affect their children.
Yeah.
And that again comes from a place of love. But I think stepping into a place where you embrace your hardships in a way. You don't dwell on them, of course, but you embrace them. You show your children that, life is not easy and there are going to be things and seasons that we walk through that are just not fun and they are challenging. But this is how I overcome it. This is how I cope with it. This is how I lean on my faith, on my supports, on my, whatever it is for you. Modeling that for your kids is so important because, children, they don't do, what is the old saying? They don't do as you say, they do as you do,
That's it.
right? So,
That's it.
it's so important that you encourage your kids to lean into vulnerability when they're hurting, when they're struggling, by showing them that you lean into it when you're struggling and you're hurting. So that's a really good way to really encourage that environment, that safe space in your home. Another way is going back to what I mentioned earlier,
Yep.
the way that you speak life over your kids. I think it's
Yes.
so important that you are building an identity around them and giving them an identity to pull from when they are hurting or struggling that is not based again in their abilities or their disabilities but more in who they are and what the word says about them and more so about their character and their courage and their compassion and their bravery and all of these things that just feel so much more solid than oh, you look beautiful today, or oh, I like those shoes that you have on, or oh, that's a nice outfit, or just very superficial kind of compliments. I mean, those are great. We all love to hear those.
Oh, yeah.
But, from time to time, more so than not, I would encourage, be looking for other adjectives, ways to describe your child and really fill them up with that. Fill up their cup. And then another tip that I like to, share for parents, things that looking back as I reflect on my upbringing and things that my parents and I have unpacked that could have been different to make a difference, is just really learning that the way that we think affects the way we feel, and that always affects the way we behave. So if your youth is, let's say, for example, coming home from school and in a super frustrated mood, they don't have the tolerance for much, they are throwing their backpack on the ground and just storming to their room, and you immediately want to correct the behavior, I think that that should actually be reversed, and you should try to lean into correction first. So I always encourage connection over correction. I don't know if
Yeah.
I said that right, but connection over correction.
Yeah.
is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when you rush to correct, you are, you are really taking away an opportunity to connect
Yes.
with your kid and learn why that frustration is there and why
Yes.
that anger is there in the first place. Because that's where real healing happens, is when
Mm-hmm.
you maybe get triggered by your kid's behavior and you're like, whoa, that's disrespectful. But before you correct it, you should lean into connecting, because sometimes, a lot of times, that is where, again, the true healing happens, from
So
my
good.
experience.
So good. Connecting over correcting. That goes back to Dr. Dan Siegel's work, where he talks about making your kids feel safe. He
Mhm.
talks about being soothed, but he also in between there says seen. And what he means by seen is emotional, right? Connection, like what you're talking about, where you're diving beneath the behavior and really understanding the behavior. What's going on right up here beneath what the individual is doing out here. And so being able to ask more questions and make less assumptions, I think a lot of parents could really use that advice and sometimes begin to apply it into their daily lives. And then I love you said modeling vulnerability, being open about some of the challenges, some of the difficulties that you go through, that you've gone through in your past, maybe when you were your child's age. Don't be afraid of those things. Don't shy away from those conversations, and then just speak life. Remind your child, again, as the old saying goes, children aren't afraid of the dark. They're afraid of being alone in the dark. So when they feel abandoned, especially in times of need, in times of failure, when they make mistakes, it could be so easy for us as parents to just dismiss that, like you said, to just correct the behavior or the failure or the mistake, but just let them know that they're not alone and that you're there to sit with them every single second and every step of the way. Emma, you just came out with a new documentary called My Ascension. You have alluded to it. You've been traveling really the country and just taking this all around, whether it be high schools or community events, churches, so on and so forth. But God is doing a work in and throughout this film. Would you just speak to what is your heart behind this, and you really hope that every viewer would walk away with upon the completion of it?
Yeah, so the documentary film, My Ascension, that has been truly the vehicle that has helped me drive my testimony into these settings,
Yeah.
into these spaces. And it's really just an incredible opportunity to share my testimony, and share God's amazing mercy and grace, and really just educate schools and teachers and communities and people alike, that, mental health is not something that you have to have a degree in or be a professional in to really start prioritizing. And the film really does a great job, like I said, of not only sharing my testimony and my lived experience, but also providing real life ways that people can promote and advocate for mental health in their communities. So the film highlights a program in a school club called Hope Squad. And that program, Hope Squad, has actually been inspired in multiple schools in multiple different states around the country since
Wow.
we started showing this documentary. So the film is incredible. Like I said, it's really the vehicle to really drive this message home, move this movement forward, should I say. And it's really just done that. And it's been a great, incredible privilege and honor to have the ability to go into schools, go into different settings around the country, and really use this testimony for the glory of God. And I've been able to do just that. So it's been great. And if people want to learn more about the film, the website is myascension.us. You can check out all the information regarding that there. And yeah.
I would encourage all of our listeners and viewers to go and check out, again, that documentary, My Ascension. It's emotional. It's influential, but I truly believe it's also transformational. I've gotten the opportunity of seeing it at our Next Gen conference down in Atlanta, and it was powerful just to sit there and not only to watch it, but then to hear your testimony following it. If you're interested, if you're listening in and you're in a high school or you have leadership of any kind of over the Next Gen and you want to book Emma, I would encourage you guys to reach out to her. She will come in and deliver just a powerful word of encouragement and hope for all of your attendees. And let me ask you this, Emma, as we close. Something I love to do here on the podcast is just allow the guests to share a pressing word of hope that God has placed on their heart for such a time as this. And so we've spoken into the parents, into the coaches, into the counselors on things that they can do to create that safety. We've talked about the significance of people, but I really want you to hone in right now to the person listening today who, again, just feels like they're alone. They're lonely. They're suffering in silence. And they're struggling. They don't really know where to turn or what to do. Emma, what's one final word of hope, encouragement, and motivation that you want to leave that person with today?
one of the things that was said to me when I first started opening up and speaking about my mental health with the counselor, one of the first things she said to me that was just so healing, and it's so simple. She said, "You're going to be okay. Everything that you are going through will be okay. Nothing lasts forever. The only constant in life is change. So you will be okay. This will not last forever. This situation, this circumstance, this trial, this relationship, whatever it is that is dragging you down, keeping you in darkness and despair, making you feel so alone, so hopeless, it's temporary. It will pass. You will be okay." Hearing that made me feel so comforted. It really just felt like a warm blanket wrapped around me when I was freezing cold. And I would love to share that. So if you are hurting, if you are struggling, if you feel like there is no hope, there is no light at the end of your tunnel, I am here to tell you and remind you and reassure you that there is light at the end of your tunnel. It is dark, it is lonely, it is cold, but you have so many options to keep you warm in the tunnel, right? And I encourage you to rely on your supports. Please reach out for help. Please become vulnerable. Please become transparent. It's going to hurt. It's not easy unpacking and healing. It's painful, but it's worth it, because in order to heal the pain, we have to feel the pain. So just know you're not alone. Jesus loves you, and you will be okay. Things will be okay.
So powerful, Emma. At the heart of suicide isn't that people actually want to die. It's that they want to end the pain. And like you mentioned, though, pain may be inevitable, but pain is temporary. You will make it through. You will be okay. Why? Because hope has a name. Hope is a person, and he is Jesus. And we pray each and every one of our listeners would be able to press into his presence even in the midst of their pain. Miss Emma Benoit, I cannot thank you enough just for your time and your willingness to join me today. From all of us here at the American Association of Christian Counselors, we love and appreciate you and all of the incredible work you do, my friend. Thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much.